Space Marines have a lot of models. The abundance of them helps a lot with parts for kit bashing, but their variety of equipment and roles opens up a lot of possibilities for even more models that could exist. For example, you've got roles like chaplains, apothecaries, ancients, then you've got equipment like blade guard and gravis armour, terminators, or even vehicles. So there's things like the Terminator Ancient, Bike Chaplain, or Gravis Apothecary. With this mix and match, there's a lot of combinations that have yet to be seen. I've done a few, like my Jump Pack Execrator, my own Terminator Chaplain, and even a more extreme combination, a character and very heavy equipment in the form of my Dreadnought Gamaldus. But it's always fun imagining more, even in the form of taking a previous idea and upgrading them with the next tier of equipment. I had a poll on my Patreon to help me decide on which previous model of mine should get an upgraded form, and I ended up going with putting a Techmarine and Terminator armour. This role is a particularly good fit for heavy machinery, and there were even a few mistakes I made or ideas I didn't get to work into my previous model that I could try again with. There's a few heavy Techmarine adjacent models to look to for inspiration, like some Iron Warriors and Iron Hands, and in particular the new Kravik Morn Mini, which I liked the design of, so this could also function as a loyalist equivalent to it. Any regular Terminator could work as a starting point, but I had a Terminator Captain spare, so I assembled some of that, trimmed off a lot of details, and tested a few other bits I had in mind to go with it, like Cataphract shoulders, a Power Fist, and an Omnicyan axe from an Iron Father Pharos. For a weapon to put on the fist, the Cataphracti parts I got from the shoulders came with a Volkite gun, which is a fitting high-tech weapon for a Techmarine. I plan to use some Cataphracti weapon arms for some servo guns, and I also used the head from a Centurion. I specifically wanted one of those helmets, as it's a heavy-duty look that's not the standard Terminator head, but it also has the same kind of angry expression the Mark 7 helmet does, which I feel gives Marines a lot of character. With all those planned parts scaling well, I got into the more in-depth building, starting with something off and on Techmarines that I didn't do for my previous one, an augmetic limb. The prominent forward leg seemed like a good candidate, so I removed the lower part of it, and made the foot more robotic using some parts from a Thallax foot, and some plasticard to bulk it out to fit a Terminator scale. I kept the leg's front armour, but used some 3mm and 1mm plastic rod as central columns, and used various cylindrical pieces cut from weapon barrels to fill it out a little. I like the plated tabard armour style from my last Techmarine, so I used some 0.5mm plasticard to make more, but I wanted to try combining a few different details alongside it. Some chainmail, made by pressing green stuff into a texture pad and cutting it to the right shape when dried. I also used some more 0.1mm thick brass sheet to make some purity seal scriptures, just cutting it into strips, adding a few folds and tears, then gluing it into 1mm plasticard to more easily attach it. That all came together under the model's existing skull belt for a well-detailed waist. To detail the front leg armour, and redeem myself from some mistakes made on my last Techmarine, I used some 0.3mm strips of plasticard as some kind of armour reinforcements that separate some sections, and to rivet it, this time I used some pre-made bolt-shaped rivets from Zinj Industries, which I glued into small holes I drilled. I filled the left leg's armour with a pattern of the rivets, but only did them as a kind of trim on the top and bottom sides of the right leg to leave room for some decals later. Working my way up, I opted to use a regular Terminator's Power Fist, which I glued the cut and trimmed Volkite gun onto. To build out the back and make it look like power armour capable of supporting a Techmarine's heavier weapons, I glued on part of a Cataphract's power pack to the lower back, which also covered where I removed a cape. Then, in place of one of the vent panels, I made a bigger exhaust piece using the end of a flamer and some plastic rod I drilled out. I also had to fill in a hollow section with green stuff and armour made from plasticard, as that part was normally covered by the cape of the base model I cut away. It looked a little rough, but I plan to cover it more later. For the Omnicyan axe, I liked the variant I made last time and wanted to try another halberd-like conversion. I again pinned and cut up sections so I could rotate and reglue it in a better position. But this time I used a Sicarian power sword for the top blade, along with a part cut from a Sword Brethren Thunderhammer to go on the opposite side of the axe in place of the clamp piece I removed. I went with one of the hands already moulded near the top of the axe, and removed another one lower in the handle section, but both those sections were a little rough, so would need covering later. I used some 5mm plastic rod to fill the holes in the shoulders where the base model's shoulder pads normally connect, and I also cut the top parts flat to fit on the cataphracti shoulders better. To go under the shoulder pads, replacing the usual leather strips that go with cataphracti shoulders, I glued down some 1mm chains, since they're a common Black Templar detail. I kept the left shoulder plain for now, but on the right I added a Mechanicum logo from a Thalax, plus a few more bolt rivets. For a servo gun and servo arm, I used some Cataphren weapon arms, cutting up and reassembling a flamer one, then combining part of one with a clamp piece I had left over from a Dooncrawler, using a taser goad as a connector. I connected that to the back using some plastic rods and a cylindrical piece cut from the top of a Skitaris power pack. For some camera or optical pieces to go around the head, I used some ones that came with the Centurion bits I bought for the helmet. With all the important parts now in place, I got to filling out the model with some details. I added some Purity Seal wraps to the servo arm, made by cutting strips out of rolled out green stuff, with the wax seal part made by flattening small green stuff balls with the end of some plastic rod. I also added some to the axe handle, to cover up where I had to remove another hand that was molded on. I added a forearm shield, using a part from the old Black Templar upgrade kit, along with some 1mm plastic rod as a replacement thumb, as the hand on the axe was missing one. It didn't work great, but it was mostly covered when chaining the weapon and wrist in standard Black Templar fashion. As Techmarines need Data Spike Mechadendrites, I added one to the Power Fist, in the same style as Data Smiths. I added a pair of smaller manipulator arms taken from Cataphrons, one to help wield the Omniscient Halberd, and another to go under the Power Fist for when its bulky digits would be too big for finer engineering work. I added some chest details, ports and connectors made from 1 and 2mm plastic rod on the right side. Then for the left side of the chest, I grabbed a smaller detail piece from a Tech Priest, just to have somewhere to connect some wires later. I added a tilt shield to the left shoulder, to later display a Crusade badge on. I connected the forearm gun to the central power pack area, gluing in some 1mm plain aluminium and wrapped wire, held together with some 1mm strips of masking tape. I used my Green Stuff World Rollmaker set to make a few different patterns of green stuff wire, connecting a few bits like the power pack, chest device and servo arm connector, and I finally covered part of the hip armour that was missing with a smaller device piece that I had previously cut from the axe and trimmed down a little. For the base of this model, I started with a raised section of cork, which did need to be cut at the right angles to match this unit's slightly weird stance that's normally made to go on some specific base terrain. Once I figured that out, I added some bricks I partially broke and damaged with some tough nippers and files. Then I also added a few skulls from the Skulls and Battlefield Trophies kit, but still left some space for texture paste later. With that, I could move on to the painting. I mostly like how my previous darker red Techmarine turned out, so I went with the same scheme, just with a minor tweak here and there. Once again, I started by priming most of it with the spray can Chaos Black, then the shoulders with Grey Seer spray. I heavily dry brushed the armour with Khorne Red, followed up with a light dry brush of Wazdagger Red to roughly highlight. I did the same to the larger mechanical areas where I could, instead using Iron Warriors for the base colour, and Tooth & Coates' plate armour for the highlight. Even though I end up going over most of the highlighted areas again at the end, this still gives great quick coverage for the primary colours of the model, and it shows the raised areas where the highlight should mostly be anyway. But from here I switched to my normal brush to regularly paint all the smaller bits of red armour and the silver metal. Then I just went down the list of other colours of the scheme. Balthazar Gold for mechanical details, Abaddon Black for half the skulls, shoulder trim and weapon casings, Rakarth Flash for all the scripture, Cabalite Green for some of the smaller wires, then Grey Seer for the other half of the skulls, the shoulders, and to prepare the optics and energy parts of the gun. For some smaller details, like the shoulder chapter icon, leg armour scripture, and Crusade badge symbols, I used decals from both the official Black Templar decal sheet and a sheet from the Mighty Brush. Once those dried, I used a few contrast paints, Karandras Green and Athematic Blue for some eyes and optics, Yandan Yellow for the energy weapon, and Black Templar to darken the silver for some of the wires and the axe's handle section. For the base, I painted all the bricks and skulls with Rakarth flesh, and used some grey cere for some very simple highlights. I also gave all the earth bits a quick coat of Doomball brown, in case it came through under the following layer of Martian iron crust. To shade the main model, I used a mix of a few different washes: Nuln Oil, Agrax Earthshade and Reichland Flesh Shade, just changing the mix slightly for what was being shaded, using more of the black Nuln Oil for the silvers, more of the brown Agrax for the red armour, and more of the Reichland for the shoulders and scripture. The base also got a mix of Agrax and Reichland, after a quick dry brush of Jakera Orange to highlight the nice texture of the iron crust. It's here that I decided to partially repaint the Volkite gun, as the yellow-orange parts were a bit too much for my liking. So checking some official models for reference, I painted the little nodes at the end with Iron Warriors, then the muzzle and the energy section coils with Balthazar Gold, which I was much happier with. I did make a start on the final touches here, mostly highlights, using the original paints to bring a bit of brightness back to the most raised and exposed areas, followed up by using paints a shade or two brighter to highlight the edges. I used Wazdaka Red for the reds, Plate Armor for the silver, Eshin Grey then Dawnstone on the black, and Hashut Copper for the coppers. I did also scribble in all the scripture for the purity seals with a fine-tipped Sakura Pigma Micron pen, which also got a follow-up matte coat of Storm Shield, as the ink dried a little too shiny for my liking. And that's how I made this Black Templar Terminator Techmarine, exploring one of the many units that could but doesn't yet exist for the army, and also adapting a mini I like into a faction I collect. Since this mini doesn't officially exist yet, it isn't usable on the tabletop, unless you play pretty loosely and proxy it for another Terminator character, but you can probably tell my approach is what looks cool or would be fun to build first and foremost, so I'm still pretty pleased with it and will happily display it alongside the rest of my Black Templars. And they will be getting even more reinforcements soon, in the form of some units from the Armageddon box that I'll be converting into Templars, but that won't be until after I've finally added a custom Thulia guild to my AdMech, after the building got a little delayed waiting for parts to arrive. If you want to keep up with all that as I'm building them, you can check out my more frequent posts on Instagram, Twitter and a few other places linked in the description. If you want to try this build yourself, I've linked to some of the kits using my Element Games affiliate link, where you can get them for cheaper than official Games Workshop prices, and also help me out a little. If you'd like to support me more directly, I also have a Patreon, where I post work in progress pictures, weekly projects updates, discuss future plans, and you can even occasionally help me decide on what to build next. I upgraded a Techmarine here, following a poll my supporters could vote on, but there were also options to put an Excavator or Agent in heavier gear too. I'd like to thank those currently supporting me on Patreon, who are Kyra, Morse Going Free, Gamrus, The Lich's Laboratory, Always Able, Nariko the Transbian Shark, B-Dog, Quirky Perceptions, Darren, Fazea, Yaroslav Altunin, Red Wolf, and Glunky Lad.